Good afternoon. Rex.
Hello, Ammo. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you beside me rather than in front of me. Why is that? We've got a guest today.
We have a guest, and we're in a small cubby hole. It's a small captain's table.
You look a bit uncomfortable.
But
You're okay with this? You're okay with this close proximity?
I'm not moving an inch.
Okay, great. Okay, good.
How's your week been? Okay.
Very good. Very busy, but it's gone quick. So that's good. It's nearly finished, so we can start again.
And we have a guest today. We've got our first guest in the new captain's table with better sound. So There's no excuses.
Yeah, welcome, Guy.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good to be here.
Guy Ngata, Coca-Cola CEO, Arena. Great to have you here.
So we're clear on the difference between the product and the building.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
CEO Arena, yeah. No, it's great to have you on board, Guy, and we're going to talk a little bit about yourself and New Zealander coming to Dubai, and it's quite a resume. So looking forward to it.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good to share on the captain's table and have a bit of a chat.
Yeah, well, where should we start?
Well, I mean, kind of normally what we say is, where did it all start? Tell us a little bit about your, as though it's some kind of Freudian interpretation about your childhood.
Sure.
But, a bit of background about you in New Zealand, and if you're happy to share that, and just talk about a few things about how you started to get in the business, and we'll take it from there, I guess.
Sure. I mean, it's a little bit like start of a Billy Joel concert, isn't it? Where Billy gets up and says, I'm sorry Billy can't make it tonight, but I'm his dad. I think the photo you shared earlier of a 10 years much younger me probably suggests that I'm the relative of that person. But look, my journey is, born and bred in New Zealand. I kind of accidentally got into what I'd call the entertainment or facilities management side of the business. A number of years ago, I was involved with sport. Used to work for the Auckland Rugby Union in their days when they were a mighty and fearful organisation. I've had some challenges along the way since, but I'll declare my roots here and now being very much blue and white from an Auckland perspective.
Well, hold on a minute. I'm just going to go now. It's going to be a short one.
This studio was designed for the Crusaders. So,
yeah, unfortunately.
Apologies.
Unfortunately, I did notice on the way in. It kind of almost stopped me in my tracks.
What year was that?
Yeah, so I left Auckland Rugby in 2003.
Okay.
I'd been with the union for about 5 years prior to that time. Worked in the Auckland Rugby Union side of things, not necessarily the Blues or the professional side. It was very much in a coaching development type role back then. And that was my first kind of real job post-university. I had a bit of a mixed bag, spent some time in the UK, abroad, hadn't finished studying at that point.
Right.
Came back, finished my studies, and then ended up working for Auckland Rugby and kind of fell in. It was always, rugby was kind of my background and played a bit and enjoyed it, then got involved with the coaching side of it and really loved that and quickly realised that, unless you're an All Black in New Zealand back then, the pathway to coaching in rugby was pretty limited. So back in 2003, I resigned from what was a job that everyone in my family thought was great and all my mates, and my whole life was talking rugby, involved with rugby, and you could never escape rugby. To Trust Stadium.
Trust Stadium.
Yeah, which was a building which was under construction based in Waitakere City. Good friend of mine, his mum said, I think you'll be great at this job. It's an operations manager for an under construction venue.
Yeah.
And I was like, I wonder what an operations manager does in a venue. So I reached out to a guy that I thought very highly of as a bit of a mentor, a guy called Murray Reid, who was the operations manager at Eden Park. Had a bit to do with Murray when I was at Auckland Rugby, and gave him a call, said, I can come and see you, Murray, and can you tell me what you do for a job and what that means? And he kind of sat down and here's what I do, he said, and what we're kind of managing in terms of the process, and went through a interview process. I started on the Monday at Trust Stadium, and the CEO left on the Tuesday through issues I won't get into.
But you didn't know?
I didn't know he was leaving. I was kind of going in to see this guy and part of his exec team or management team, and then the next day he was out the door, So
he grabbed his hat and coat and...
Yep. So there was me and then the finance manager, and we did everything from kind of trying to book activity and to cleaning bathrooms and washing windows and putting carpet tiles on the floor and setting up basketball courts and everything in between. So
because it was home of the Breakers, wasn't it?
Yeah, Breakers were based there. Yeah. Breakers were based there. We had the Auckland-based netball franchise based there as well.
Yeah.
And Waitakere City Rugby Club was based there as well. So it was a 5,000 capacity venue, which was predominantly focused on community activity, but then there was some anchor tenant sporting activity, and then also it was, an event centre looking at.
So would that be like 2 or 3 times a week use, or?
Yeah, in some respects. When Breakers were in season, they were playing, home games every week. Netball team were playing kind of pretty regularly as well.
Yeah.
We were trying to then supplement kind of other major event activity. K1 boxing was kickboxing was a big deal back then at the time, and kind of the precursor in some ways to kind of UFC, and so we had those guys in the building quite often. The National Kennel Club was our first event in the building. The dog show, with 2,000 odd dogs, and
was that a shit show as well?
Yeah, a little bit. We had an evacuation of the building. Fire alarm started going. We probably didn't have an emergency management plan at the time, and I was on the PA saying, "Please get out," and people were scrambling to get their dogs, and there was no emergency. It was just one of those.
It was very positive.
Sensors, and you don't know that at the time, right? So a good learning curve.
But all the dogs got out safely.
Yeah, the dogs got out safely.
The dogs were harmed.
For our canine loving listeners.
There's no dogs hurt in this filming, right? Which is important. So, for me, it was a great, learning the ropes of venue management from the ground up in a lot of ways. Booking content and everything in between, and stakeholder relationships, and just trying to do what we could on a daily basis. We probably weren't particularly strategic. We were just very getting the nuts and bolts of the business kind of functioning and operating. So we weren't thinking too far ahead.
You can tell the learning curve and everything, and like doing everything from one end to the other. That must have been pretty good, right?
Yeah, it gave you a good core basis, and what we do even now. I probably like to think I have a fairly kind of reasonable understanding of the operational side of our business, and hard to pull the wool over someone who has that too, which helps. So from there, as I would drive to work each day, they were building this new, what I thought was a stadium/indoor facility on the waterfront in Auckland, and I became very curious about what was going on there. That's kind of who I am in a lot of ways. And I took an opportunity to introduce myself to the team that were operating that venue. It wasn't open, so under construction. I invited one of the guys actually to a Breakers game at Trust Stadium.
Sure.
Knew where he was sitting, gave him the tickets, followed him on camera through CCTV as he kind of came into the building, watched him sit down in the seats. Miraculously, there was a spare seat next to him, which I sat in, and kind of went through trying to convince them that I was the right person to join their team. Joined the team at Vector in Vector Arena in 2006.
So it worked.
It worked. Yeah, I must have been a little unrelenting, perhaps. But there's a message out there for people pursuing careers too, right? And I came on board as the event operations manager at the arena, or Vector Arena at the time, and we were a little bit delayed in opening. We were intending to open kind of 3 months after I came on board. That was the kind of the timeline, but it ended up being not quite a year, almost a year in terms of getting construction completion. And the company that I worked for, QPAM, which was Key Park Arena Management, owned and operated by the Jacobson family out of Australia, a major promoter of business in Australia and video operator, in partnership with Auckland Council. So we carried all the operational risk, and the company still does for a period of 40 years from the construction timeline. And I transitioned from that role, events and operations, into the CEO role not long after we opened. We opened with 2 back-to-back Red Hot Chili Peppers shows. The then CEO had taken on a new role overseas. I met with him and the chairman, Kevin Jacobson, and we talked about me stepping into that role. And Bruce McTaggart, who was a great mentor and friend in the CEO capacity, he had show 1 for Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I had show 2 the next night.
Right.
There's an interesting kind of anecdote about that show. We were working on the porridge rights in New Zealand, which can be a little interesting in terms of what product you might have available for consumers.
Okay.
And we end up going with an Australian company, a team from Foster's, not one of the New Zealand brands.
I'm sure that went down.
Well, at the time, neither of the New Zealand companies took us particularly seriously. And the team from Australia, they did. And on the first night, we thought we had enough product to get through 2 shows of Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
We sold everything for night 1. we had to make a call at 2:00 in the morning after the first show. The second show was on a Sunday, and call the managing director in New Zealand saying, "Hey, you need to open your warehouse to deliver the same amount of product you delivered last week for tonight's show because we're out." And he said it would be my absolute delight to do that. So on a Sunday, a number of lorries or trucks turned up, and we went through it again. But look, Victor Arena was a legitimate, international kind of multi-purpose arena based in Auckland, and still is. Became very much part of that Australian touring cycle, and was great for us as a team.
And going back to the point before, you're saying about forage. Do you come down to calculate roughly how much per person should be intake and stuff?
Yeah, you base it typically on the type of audience you are going to see, or the type of event will take the audience typically. So some crowds
dog owners apparently you just smash it.
Yeah. Well, when you get, let's call a genre mature pop or mature rock, that is a crowd that will challenge you in that space.
Right.
They've got disposable income. Typically.
Yeah, sure.
They want to make a good night of it and have a lot of fun. It's an R&B crowd's not great in our experiences in the past. And that aligns with merchandising as well. Similar kind of numbers roll out. Country's good. Country crowd come in and have a good old time.
You see, it's funny what you say about that, because there's a very fine line between the mature rock audience and just that few years extra. I remember going to see Simon and Garfunkel at Hyde Park, and there were coachloads of Derby and Joan people coming in from all over the country, and all I could see was a constant flow of older people going to and from the loos all the time.
Yeah.
So they probably weren't drinking that much because they were spending so long queuing in the bloody dunnies to be able to get any stuff.
It's the hierarchy of needs, isn't it? If you think about it in venue, you've got to get to the bathroom before you can get to the concession, before you buy the merchandise, So, Victor Arena was incredible. We had a fantastic name rights partner and ownership group. They really empowered me to make some decisions in terms of how we shaped the business. We became a lot more strategic in terms of our thinking versus previous roles. And I was there for a little over 4 years. Really enjoyed the progression into that more senior role, dealing with a lot of really experienced Aussie promoters that we typically work with, and great New Zealand promoters too, to try and create this really exciting kind of entertainment offering in New Zealand. And Auckland really, bats above its weight in terms of entertainment, and New Zealand does in so many ways. You look at the size of an Auckland audience. Auckland was about 1.4 million at the time, so not a particularly big city, but we were selling, my kind of final year there, 500,000, 600,000 tickets, which is for that market really, really significant. And then from there, I moved to China. I moved to Shanghai in 2010 with AEG in a venue called Mercedes-Benz Arena. Sure. Joint venture between the NBA, AEG, based out of Los Angeles, and AEG China team, and Shanghai Media Group is our majority shareholder based there in Shanghai, and we were operating as the Shanghai World Expo Culture Centre for 6 months before we then transitioned into Mercedes-Benz Arena proper in November 2010. So I always akin it to being the hardest soft opening of a building ever. We were 184 consecutive days, 16 hours a day, 8 million visitors through the building in that 6-month period, and we had door handles that would pass their shelf life, they're used by date because they've been used so often. We had, just hinges that were no longer working on doors.
Just pure numbers as well.
Just volume, just volume.
I think you were talking earlier on when we touched on this before, you were talking about the numbers of people that were local were pretty much more than a whole year or something you said the population?
Yeah, so Pudong was the side of the river that we were on, which is east and west sides of the river in Shanghai. Yeah. More people living on that side of the river than live in New Zealand. And so from a guy that, I lived overseas a little bit in the UK when I was younger and travelled a little bit, that is quite intimidating initially to get you around that. But, Shanghai is an amazing city, a really progressive city in a lot of ways. It was very, very ambitious. It was, the World Expo for Shanghai was the equivalent of Beijing's Olympics in 2008, and that very kind of opening up to the world and Shanghai in so many ways had always been the most international of cities in mainland China. If you look back to the history of Shanghai and how it's evolved and changed, and then went quiet for a period of time, as we all kind of know that story. And then kind of came out of that and just incredible. The scale, the volume. You never felt you were in a market that was in mainland China. It was driven, and things can happen at a speed, or could happen and still can, at a speed there with which I wasn't prepared for initially, but became accustomed to over time. So
another steep learning curve.
Yeah, there's been plenty.
But could be challenging,
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, it could be challenging, I guess, on making a decision. Sometimes took time to galvanise, I guess, the thinking of a tripartite agreement from a shareholder point of view. But once that decision was reached and moved forward, we moved forward at pretty breakneck speed. So, content was driven around international touring was probably about 15% back then. It was very much mainland driven, mainland K-pop, Canto pop, J-pop, etc. in terms of the activity in the market.
Not a great deal of Western talent, obviously.
Yeah, no, but it was starting to build, and there'd be periods of time where you'd see it surge, and then it would soften for a while and then kind of come again. So we worked really close with the team at AG Presents in terms of what they were doing. And a little bit tough in that market in many ways too, because not too many promoters worked across the whole country, so you were kind of dealing with very much Shanghai-driven promoters, albeit there might be acts coming in and playing in the north and Beijing, or in the south and kind of Guangzhou and those areas, So, but fabulous building. There was this integration of an 18,000-seat arena with a 1,000-seat nightclub, with an ice skating rink in the basement, with about 40,000 square metres of mixed retail space. We had a multiplex cinema in the roof, which had 640 seats in there, 7 restaurants upstairs. So it was this really mixed vertical integration of activity. And when the Chinese partner went and looked at a number of different venues around the world, and O2 Arena is one of the obviously iconic venues that AEG owns and operates in Staples Center in LA. They kind of took a lot of those different component parts and said, well, we want what they've got and we want what they've got in LA, but we want to integrate the whole thing vertically, which is challenging to operate because the design around the building was, we'll just let people flow wherever they want to go.
Right.
Not quite so easy.
And all connected by a metro or...
Yeah, metro came in and out in the basement.
Very easy.
During Expo, Metro didn't run into the building because you have to have that ticketing control around it. Yeah. But now the Metro terminates downstairs and links up, and that precinct is evolved. Expo finished over 10 years ago, 12 years ago now. There you go. So China was a mystery and a lottery, and in some ways what I knew about China then doesn't count for now. It was a cash society back then. People had phones, but there was no Alipay, there was no WeChat Pay, there was none of that kind of activity happening in the market, and all of a sudden overnight it changed to this digital kind of environment where shop vendors on the sides of streets selling snacks at 2 o'clock in the morning were zip dipping, on their phones to process payments. So it's changed enormously. Live music scene is still progressing in a lot of ways in terms of China, and China is reflective that there's not many promoters that work across it as a unified region. They're all independent of where they're based.
And to this day, are they still very restrictive of the talent that can come through, the Western talent, for example?
Yeah, look, I think you've got to understand that that was established well before people were starting to tour, so there was really strong controls around permitting and licensing of artists. Everyone that works in that space knows it, but it is pretty tough in terms of where someone might have been outspoken about a certain particular political matter, and it's pretty clear either yes or no.
Yeah, right.
And you move on. Yeah. And you move on. And some companies have had some really tough times on some artists taking liberties in that market to probably prove a political point and use that sounding board, which they get on a plane and they leave, but you've got someone that's established a business over a long time that suffers on the back of it. So, we've all got to be very careful in every industry or every market that we operate in about how people might behave. But equally you can't control that too. So you've got to they say, swing away sometimes, right?
Yeah. And so how long was that for you? I mean, that sounds like a pretty tough and intense role that you had for...
it was great too. You know, and I loved it in so many ways. I was there for just under 4 years in Shanghai, and then moved to Sydney. So again, totally different. Moved to run what was then Qudos Bank Arena, which was then Auckland's Arena, which is now Qudos Bank Arena, based out of Melbourne, Sydney Olympic Park. So it was part of the Olympic development in 2000. So 21,000 seat arena. And really vibrant and live music. So a kind of an anchor stop on that live music, kind of touring through Australasia. If you look at the must-play markets in those regions, Melbourne and Sydney are absolutely two of them. And, you know, it depends whether you play Adelaide or Perth more and more so now. Brisbane, Auckland will fall into that mix. But Sydney, Melbourne were the two that you had to be in because of the size of the populace. So moved into... effectively my first role of an ongoing business, a business that had been established for, kind of 13 years prior to me getting there, whereas prior to that everything had been greenfields, it had been startup, more or less. So it was really different. So I went into a team that I wasn't involved with recruiting or training or kind of, I guess, having my influence on or a cultural influence that we were trying to create, to inheriting a team that kind of did things a certain way. And so I had to step back and kind of learn about them for a little bit, and then learn about me, and then try and implement some change, I guess.
And kick out the ones you didn't like.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I mean, I think there was a bit of change that went on. Not long after starting, but I think they were just trying to reposition some of the interest of the business, you know. So look, Sydney was great. Really, really busy building. You know, we were doing 1 million tickets a year. You know, more or less. Shows that were coming through were every international artist you can probably name were touring, and multiple shows. And One Direction were huge at the time. We had 8 One Direction shows. You know, we had Beyonce play 4 nights. We had Michael Bublé play 4 nights. We had Pink play 7 nights.
I was going to say, what is the fascination? And she's a fantastic artist, but Australians love Pink, don't they? And it's not like, it's like, should we do 10 or 12 shows?
Well, yeah, I mean, back in, I want to say 2015, she played more nights in Melbourne than she played in North America on that tour. Yeah. She played 19 nights in Melbourne, 63 dates overall for that tour, and shows that were selling out. She was going to another market, coming back, playing another 5.
It's so funny that you find certain talent that is liked in certain places. So my wife's Irish, and she said that Garth Brooks apparently is loved in Ireland, the country crowd, and he goes and plays like 4 or 5 days on the trot at the showgrounds or something in Dublin. So it's so funny that the way you pick up certain things.
And I think I like Billy Joel there. That was it's a funny joke how they were talking about who is this guy, Billy Joel. No one knew. And then they sort of
it's not bad on the piano.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think maybe she just got into the psyche and continues to do so there.
And it's the same with Foo Fighters too, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, look, the Australian live touring market is huge. The Australians will get out, they'll be involved, they'll buy tickets to shows. If you look at Ed Sheeran and the numbers that he was doing, he was doing crazy numbers everywhere, to be fair. But enormous ticket volumes in that market. Look, I think in some ways it's a market that's really diverse as well. As Kiwis, sometimes we see Australians as being of a type, and that's not a negative. But it is really diverse. The country music scene in Australia too is enormous. You look at Tamworth and there, and beyond the seaboard, and where we were based out west, it was pretty easy for people from the Blue Mountains to go and get into us, and so the country crowds as well were, everyone coming in the 10-gallon hats and the boots, and there's a certain type of product they drink that night. But I mean, she just got under people's skin in a good way. She's the same artist on day 63 as she is on day 1. She gives her all, and I think there's a lot to be said about an artist that people can see, I've paid decent money for a ticket, but I've left having an experience which is they've given it to me totally in terms of
I agree. I had no expectations for her at all. And I happened to be at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix a few years back, and she was playing, and we'd had a pretty long day, as you can imagine, and just turning up and thinking, okay, well, we'll go and watch, and then just actually being, I think I'd say blown away, but she was really exceptionally good.
Yeah.
And, when you get to see someone, and as good as they are, you realise all of a sudden it's like a light bulb moment. Of course, they're great live.
Yeah. Well, she's a live artist as well. There's a lot of artists out there, or some, that are recording artists. She applied her craft live, and she's got that live experience and that live show, which she gives her all. She's up to the ear, she's doing the trapeze and everything in between, and people are just staggered by it. You can be sitting in the 10th row in the nosebleeds, and all of a sudden she flies up and she's standing next to you on a wire, having had an amazing experience. So I think that's pretty special for people too, that they feel totally engrossed in their performance. And sure, clearly I'm a bit of a fan. So Australia was wonderful in terms of that live music experience, and music very much at our core, in that building as well. And then, kind of home came calling. I headed back to my roots and did this kind of funny navigation of, Asia Pacific to get back to one side of Eden Park to the other. Given we were based as Auckland Rugby in Eden Park those years ago, and ended up back as CEO of Eden Park, and what a great privilege that was in so many ways for me. So I've been involved with operating the two kind of major venues in Auckland. British and Irish Lions were through in 2017. There was a lot of build-up in terms of that tour, which is such a big deal in all things rugby in New Zealand and internationally, and what an incredible crowd, So we had three Lions games, 2 tests, and then the Blues game as well. And no disrespect to the good folk that operate the venue in Wellington, but we were very hopeful for a draw, or maybe an All Black loss that we'd never ever talk about hoping for, to see a final, or the kind of final of the series we played the week later at Eden Park, and we got it, and it was drawn, which was extraordinary in so many ways.
What a final! Yeah.
And we were standing, kind of in the end goal when we thought there was a penalty. It wasn't a penalty. Should have been a penalty.
It was a penalty.
And then we got bundled into touch, and the game was over. I've never been in a venue full of 50,000 people in my life where there was just this silence and uncertainty about, so what, are we going to kick goals? Are we going to play extra time? Are we going to...
Was there any talk of looking in rule books and stuff like that, or was there any?
No, it was a done deal. Rick blew the whistle. He was like, whistle in the sock, and kind of, I'm heading for a shower, and players were standing there looking at each other. And I think one of the great moments of, in sportsmanship, how those two teams came together. I don't think they really wanted to deep down. Jerome Kano kind of got involved and threw his arm around someone, and Kieran Reid and Sam Warburton, as captain of the team, and that's an amazing photo of those two teams together.
The joint cup,
kind of side by side and holding the cup, and
that doesn't really happen. It's like it's not the same as a World Cup. You don't share a World Cup, do you?
Well, as Kiwis, we probably hope you did sometimes, given a recent cricket loss, but that is what it is.
Yeah.
But I think there is a place for it in sport in a lot of ways, because you get two teams that battle it out, and the game couldn't decide the winner, and maybe it's how it should be sometimes. But Eden Park was fantastic. Brought me back to New Zealand, but I kind of knew deep down there was probably still some unfinished business elsewhere, and the opportunity came in Dubai, and moved up here in October 2017.
And no experience of coming through here before?
Never. I'd been here briefly to meet the owner earlier that year.
Okay, but you'd never kind of been through before, going to Europe or anything like that? Not even a pit stop? So what were your kind of like, okay, now we get to the, it's all interesting, but like to the nitty gritty of where you are now, what you're doing, and like initial kind of expectations, were they met, or did you have none? You had no idea? What about?
Yeah, I guess for me it wasn't the first dance in some ways. I had that experience abroad, and probably took a slightly different way of transitioning than I might have done in China. And you're further down the track in your career in terms of your knowledge base, etc., and kind of comfort in your skin. So it was probably close to what I might have expected.
Okay.
You know, a lot of expectation from a very ambitious owner. You know, near us. In terms of the ownership group as they were then. You know, we worked with the team at DXB Entertainment that ran parks and resorts.
Had it been named then by the time?
No. So it was very much under the auspice of a design kind of.
It's a blueprint.
Yeah. I joined, it was maybe not quite at halfway through construction.
Okay.
So our team within AEG, technical team, had been here from day one. That contract with AEG was signed, I want to say, like at the end of 2015. So, you know, there was tilt slab was all done, precast was up, the roof wasn't on the building, and I was employee kind of number one.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was back to that greenfields startup, growing team. You know, selling the sizzle, the vision in some ways, making sure that we had an ownership group that understood where we were trying to go as the operator on their behalf. And that's been very much our remit, you know. So AEG, as it was then, AEG facilities, you know, we were AEG Auckland based out of the Australian kind of regional kind of operation. You know, our remit is twofold in some respects. It's either as an operator on behalf of an owner, or we've got equity in the relationship in some type of joint venture. And there's a couple we own outright. Okay. So, you know, Mr. Anschutz, who is the A in AEG, you know, if you look at Staples Centre, O2 Arena in London, you know, they're AEG assets and not operated necessarily on behalf of, they're owned outright, versus others that are joint ventures or operator relationships.
So how does it work out? In my mind, you've got promoters, obviously, that, you know, will promote a tour and then they're pitching, or indeed venues are pitching to get them to come through.
Yeah.
Is it like a split revenue sometimes in terms of ticket take, or what?
Yeah, I mean, typically there's you know, two separate contracting relationships. There's the artist through their management team or their agent will have a relationship with the promoter. The promoter will carry risk on a number of events, or a one-off event based regionally. Okay. Potentially, or they'll do a global deal, which has become kind of the rage, where you've got these, you know, enormous guarantees which are being negotiated in Europe and in North America for artists, and then it's guaranteed in might be 200 dates internationally, you know, across the world, or 150 dates, and that's a big responsibility and a big liability in a lot of ways too.
I was going to say the insurance companies do pretty well for those kind of things, don't they?
Yeah.
It's big ticket money in the Lloyd's market.
Yeah, and then they'll carve off a region potentially, and they might sell off, you know, Asia Pacific to a certain promoter, or they might promote that themselves in the region, or they have someone that says, I want to become a promoter. I'd love to be able to buy 3 dates in Mumbai or wherever it might be, or Dubai or Abu Dhabi or somewhere in between. So they're just really trying to claw back, you know, the guarantee that they've obligated commercially to the artist, and then the venues kind of sit in a relationship with the promoter. So promoter in a region, you know, we'll then try and make sure that we kind of can secure that content in our building by cutting a commercial deal with them. And our deals, typically without getting into that too much, typically a percentage of box office plus costs. So it tends to be how we structure a deal. So you share the upside if there's upside, but if it's not going great, then everyone's in a similar kind of position.
Yes, okay.
So yeah, but there's all sorts of deals. You can do a flat guarantee on venue. We did a bit of that in China because box office control was very much with the promoter in China. We typically tend to be wanting to control ticket volumes and ticket sales through our relationships, and you know, one of the key mitigating factors for us is making sure that we can control, you know, ideally box office funds where they end up in the security around them. So there's a risk if it ends up somewhere else and someone decides to pocket that cash and go for a wander something. Yeah, right. So look, I got here and we were growing the team, working with the ownership group, the construction team. We had a team dedicated in terms of the technical services to make sure that we got a building which met the brief, that we could operate long term, knowing that we could, you know, work with promoters and acts and those that were engaging directly from a content point of view to make sure you could deliver events that were going to work in the building. And we've got a fantastic building. We've got
it is a superb building.
Yeah, a building which acoustically is almost unrivaled. We are very much multi-purpose in design and construction, but with a core focus of music being, our anchor tenures in a lot of ways, and a diversity of music types. And so, we came into the market, some challenges in terms of getting open. There's, never an exacting science about construction at times. And then in that period from kind of arriving to when we opened in June, 2019, we were looking clearly at the commercial program. The relationship with Coca-Cola was established at that time as a name rights partner, then a whole lot of other founding partnerships, the Marriott Bonvoy team, working with Visa, the guys from Book My Show, Marriott Bonvoy, so there was a whole range of them. And then on the flip side of that too is making sure that we could program content into the building that was going to work with those commercial partners, but also be interesting and attractive for the people of Dubai. And that's, we've probably talked about it a couple of times, not in this kind of forum, but you are building a modern day town hall when you build an arena. It's that kind of sense of, right, you need, music's important, you need to be able to deliver that, you need to find a space that sport can work in from an indoor context. Okay. The kind of non-event day activity in terms of corporate events are important. When we hosted the, Dubai Airport Scala dinner, a little over a year and a bit ago, you need to be able to deliver that type of content as well as everything in between. So design's important, but diversity of content's really important too. So look, we came out of the blocks pretty strong once we got going. After kind of, are we opening? Are we going? Are we in? Kind of making that decision to move forward and having confidence in terms of where we were construction, commercial, and program. And it was interesting, last February we were kind of sitting around after the Maluma show, which was on Valentine's Day, last year, and kind of post-event debrief with the team, and it was interesting conversation saying how good it felt to have kind of got to that point into what is probably more normal touring type of the year or time of the year. And we were feeling pretty buoyant. We were starting to see some activity in China that was being cancelled. Yeah. There were some shows in Wuhan, ironically, that we were actually making some noise about. Why don't they play in our neck of the woods, not too far away in some respects? And then within weeks we were closing up shop, and putting a pause on our operation and postponing shows that were locked in for later in the year in 2020 and the rest of this. I won't say history, but
devastating in terms of the disappointment because what was due to come online and looking forward to anticipation-wise.
Yeah. So, anyways, and I think you do go through that when you open a building, or any kind of relationship in any industry. There's that euphoria of getting going and kind of getting momentum in the marketplace, and then it flattens out a little bit from an operational point of view, and then you've got to keep it moving, and then you get into that rhythm of events, bump out, bump in, event, bump in, bump out, and making sure that you're a building that's busy because dark days are our nemesis. Of course. You've still got electricity bills, you've still got kind of those overheads that exist, and so you're better off having someone in there than nothing. So. Some disappointment in a lot of ways, and really during that time we've seen, as we've all seen, with opportunities that presented themselves, the market's kind of been encouraged. We saw some activity through kind of November into January from last year to this, and gone a bit soft again now with some further restrictions that are in place, and we understand the nature of where they are at, but
do you see green shoots coming through that, like thinking that potentially from, let's just say, the back end of next year, this year, where there's kind of like, is that early planning and saying, well, if contingency allows us to be able to do X, Y, and Z, surely all over the place, promoters and venues are starting to pencil in some things potentially.
Yeah, they are. We are. We one of the benefits, one of the challenges in this market is that the lead time has always been typically short. And I was a little that was one of the things that not caught me off guard, but was a little surprising here. You know, in an Australian market or New Zealand or even China in some respects, you could see 6 months to a year being a typical lead time for what we call a genuine international tour. Here, you know, you can have a conversation, and within a month, you know, it's on sale and happened.
Yeah,
you know, or 6 or 8 weeks, which is
there's a lot of one-offs out here.
Yeah.
You don't see part of like the natural move from say wherever it is. Let's just say Budapest or something.
Yeah.
And then coming here and then going off to Singapore and then going down to Australia.
Yeah.
It's that hasn't really happened.
Yeah, someone will fly in and they've come from Eastern Europe and then they'll fly off to Reading Festival or something.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
No rhyme or reason to what we'd call an actual touring.
And that's a challenge, right?
Yeah. It's a challenge, and it was as we were going through that cycle, but it's actually an opportunity on the flip side as we come out of COVID, you know, all these kind of restricted kind of periods. And so we've got people, or we see promoters here that actually are pretty nimble and can move quite quickly. But you've got to try and attract the date and get the time. Look, there's artists that want to tour. You know, they're like empty buildings. They're not making money when they're not on the road. And if you look at the music revenue model and how that's changed over a period of time, from selling albums and making a ton of money through that metric to online and downloadable, and gig companies making probably the lion's share of the revenue around that music space, the artist has got to get out and tour. They've got to make money because it's their revenue outright, you know, typically.
If you think with the advent of the local market becoming larger for live music, with our cousins down the road, with our cousins like an hour and a half down, a little short flight away, do you think we'll probably get to see bands say, okay, well, we'll do there first, then we'll come to Dubai, and then we'll go onwards? Or do you think it'll be, because I know there are challenges in terms of funds and availability and all of those kind of things, and also actually depending on, some may want to pay here, but they may not want to pay somewhere else. It's a bit of a boiling pot, isn't it, around here, and there are challenges with that.
Yeah, there are. You know, as an operating company, ASM Global, when we came into market, one of the key things is in terms of the communication with our owner, Neras, which is now Dubai Holding, because that's changed over recent times in terms of their merger. You need multiple venues across a region to be able to amortise a tour. And to your point, Rex, you really need to make sure that there can be a regional promoter that says, you know what, I'll take a guarantee on 5 dates. Yeah. Now I'll play one in Dubai at Coca-Cola Arena, and I'll play one in the market down the road potentially, and I'll play one in Saudi and in Bahrain, and that gives me an opportunity to amortise my costs. Mm-hmm. You know, there's not these what I call really probably slightly outrageous guarantees that have been provided to some artists because it's a one-off, and the nature of the one-off means you can't amortise across a greater run. Yeah. So I think that's as the market matures, we think that's a really important next step. Okay, yes, there becomes potentially more competition, and if you look at it from a municipality, destinational tourism point of view, it's not brilliant in some ways if you've got the same artist playing on your doorstep or across the region, because it's hard to attract necessarily international visitation on the back of that. But equally, I think the way things are moving, domestic tourism is equally as important, and keeping people in a market without going somewhere else is part of that challenge too. So, and
the ability to be able to play in the summertime, so both open venues. That's a huge win, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, when we opened, it was the 14th of June, with Maroon 5, and we'd had Russell Peters the week before. But in terms of at capacity of Maroon 5, it was warm. It was a warm day outside, as you can imagine, in the middle of June, and you guys have been in the region for a long, long time, so you appreciate that. But people got it. They were excited. There was a great energy about it. And we've seen that through other music events that we've had since. Obviously, you don't go opening doors at midday, but neither do you have many artists that are awake and wanting to perform at midday either. So it does play into the hands. It does make it a lot more viable. Clearly, you need it in this part of the world. And, it's about the touch points you can control being positive ones for people and trying to, last thing you want to do is have a delay on doors because people are standing outside and looking, beautiful in their regalia and a bit of a sweaty mess by the time they walk in. So there's all those kind of elements that we've tried to make sure that we create an experience which is positive. Okay, there's times we probably don't get it right, but it's not to mean that there's not that intent and that desire to improve continually, so that's in some ways been the journey of the project here in Dubai, with the Coca-Cola Arena. It's taking that ambition, kind of delivering it from concept to reality, and then kind of moving it forward to make sure that it becomes actually, part of people's thinking from an entertainment perspective. We'll get back to that point. It's going to take a bit more time for us all, I think, but we've spent as much time as we'd like to spend reviewing policy, procedure, managing costs. We've got a team that continues to work really hard. We've got a family of partners that are there. They just want to have some certainty about when things can start moving back in the right direction, and then we'll pull the trigger and we'll go again.
Yeah. Has there been any surprises? Obviously started Maroon 5 on artists that you thought may have been more popular, or B, far more popular than what you thought would have been? And that would probably that'd be interesting in all the markets that you've been to.
Yeah, there's always a surprise package somewhere along the way, right? I mean, I remember back in Auckland in 2008, it would have been Kings of Leon. Kings of Leon had played out in New Zealand less than a year earlier than that. They'd played to a theatre of about 3,000 people, I think, maybe not quite sold out.
Right.
Within a year, they were back, selling out, back-to-back arena nights in Auckland, doing crazy business at really respectable ticket pricing, which I think is a really important part of the guarantee. If it's too high, you've got to then convert that into a ticket price, which is tough on people that are fans. Lady Gaga opened for the Pussycat Dolls back in 2007 in Auckland.
Right.
A year later, she was selling out arena shows. Less than a year, actually. She was selling out shows around the world, and so in those markets, that's probably two examples. Here, Maroon 5 probably could have done a second night. There was really strong interest. It's about trying to find a date to back that up, and we worked with the team that done events on that show, and they were great in terms of stepping in and promoting it, and Girish and his guys did an incredible job of taking that event to market, and we were, and behind that supporting it, and we're happy not to be the face of the publicity side, but make sure that we get the content, I tell you one thing that was interesting. I was speaking to a group of guys yesterday about how prominent and how significant the Filipino audience has been here. In terms of actually getting in behind live events and particularly music, and that for me was a little surprising. In some ways, I probably didn't realise how material that would be. So not that you can continually find content that's just going to satisfy one kind of demographic.
But what is that? Is it more pop, or is it more local music?
If it's got a catchy tune in it.
Okay. Right.
They like their rock music. I remember going up to Abu Dhabi. I was doing some work with the guys up there, and just been taken into the stadium and shown. They have their whole setup there, and it was impressive. But this was Metallica, by the way, and it was just extraordinary the amount of Filipinos that were in the audience. I'm guessing now, and this is probably about 9 or 10 years ago. But I would think there were probably 60%, 70% Filipino.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when they played in China. Metallica's first shows ever were in our building in Shanghai at Mercedes-Benz, and this, you'd expect to be a Chinese audience, right? But the underswell support for a band like that in China was staggering, So I think there's always surprises. Leonard Cohen when he played in New Zealand, just the gravitas of him as a performer. you know, and you always know that a show's popular when your phone starts to ring and people you haven't heard from for a long time become very friendly again. And hey, just seeing how things are going. And I heard that a certain show was announced.
Yes, I apologise for that too, Guy. I apologise for you.
But that's actually one of those funny things. You're like, wow, okay. It's,
well, if they're calling me, then they must be good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, one of my favourite aunts, and I should say that, she calls me, then I know it's popular too, right? So there's always been surprise packages. I think on the reverse side about underwhelming sales performance at times, we probably in our industry keep that pretty close shop, because it's not in anyone's interest to start saying, I do recall a show that sold really poorly and we thought it was going to sell more.
Go on, mate.
I'm going to put you on the spot now. Don't worry, I'm not going to give you numbers. Can you think of an event in the time that you've been involved where that stuck in your mind saying, that blew my socks off? Out of all these events that you've seen, any particular one or two that...
Yeah, look, I think Maroon 5 here was pretty special. There's obviously that kind of connection to the project and seeing the building have life, have a soul. Because up until then you've got bricks and mortar, and all of a sudden you give it a heartbeat. You've got people in it, you've got energy which you can't ever replicate in any other way. Stevie Wonder in New Zealand, I grew up listening to Stevie Wonder all my life, trips down to Ruatoria, a little country town where my father's whānau from, and we drove down there and Stevie Wonder would do kind of 3 loops of the reverse cassette in and out and around again. And, I try not to be a fan, but I think equally we're all fans at times. And there are moments where I think you've got to actually say to your team and the people, hey, you know what, you can't be robotic about your work, because there's people that are coming to events that are totally engrossed. They might have been fans forever. It might be the first experience of the artist. And we've got, a privilege to be part of creating what's a positive impression. Now, we can't control the artist's mood or the artist kind of activity on stage. Well, you're right, but delivering on a rider is really important, so you actually can create a positive atmosphere for them to be at their optimal ability to perform well for their fans. But Stevie Wonder for me is, I was a fan. I got side of stage and kind of, flashed my AAA pass to make sure I could get as close as I could, and sat there and took in probably 20 minutes, maybe a little more, of a show which was breathtaking, But it's actually really hard at times to be in a venue that you manage and probably let your hair down, so to speak. It's typically been in other people's venues that I've probably enjoyed it more, because you can appreciate it as a music fan, and there's been a number of those occasions which I've been really fortunate to see a lot of shows over the years, and hopefully fortunate to see a lot more in the future. And it's been the ones sometimes that have been unexpected that have been totally surprising, which have been great.
Well, that's the great thing, isn't it? It's the unexpected which makes it exciting and interesting. Our producer was quickly, when I say our producer, the guy at the end of the table, Ted, he was gesturing. I don't know, are we running out of time? Or?
You've got plenty of time. James, you've got to speak into the microphone, mate. Yeah.
Sure, sorry.
Yell at that mic, James.
Yeah, it's never been a problem before. Okay. No, but I'm finding it really interesting, and obviously it's difficult to talk about when we're going to be back online because no one knows. But
look, we continue to be optimistic, right? I mean, I think the industry will move quickly when the opportunity is there. But we need to give people comfort about activity, being in places of mass gathering. As a company, we've spent a lot of time on this hygiene kind of preventative program called Venue Shield, in terms of how we manage that relationship between the artist or the hirer, their teams, suppliers, fans, our team, to make sure they're safe. And that's been, successful to date, but it'll keep being important forever. I don't think we're going to forget this in a hurry. And it's going to shape our business for a long, long time. But is there demand there? I think so. People that are probably a little over Zoom calls, as great as they've been and as important as they've been to keep us all connected, we're social animals, right? We need that engagement. We need, I think, that social kind of togetherness and a kind of a unified cause, be it sport, be it music, be it whatever it might be that tickles your fancy, So No, we're ready to go when it's time to go. It's just kind of getting to that point where there's comfort from a consumer perspective, from a promoter perspective to carry risk, and municipality to have comfort in terms of, moving through what is this kind of testing period into vaccination, and, the aspirations clearly that to have the UAE at the forefront of a world that's vaccinated before probably most other markets. So that will cause interesting opportunities when the only place you might be able to go for a period are a number of different, nations that aren't linked. To our point, we might have strange tours bouncing around the world for a period of time, so it gets kind of more continuity across different regions. So,
Well, if you get an advantage here, then bring it on. I mean, people will be looking forward to it. I mean, we always used to go to stuff, but I think the fact that we miss it so much has become even more relevant to us, that given the safety factor of lots of people becoming vaccinated, not too long a future, then that'll be something that will be really appetising for us.
That's on the company. We'll swing away again and go for kind of a recommencement in round 2, but until then,
keep going.
Yeah.
So, Guy, we had a call from a question from Instagram, long-time listener, Kiki Wilson.
First-time
caller from Auckland. He was asking if you could tell us what was in the infamous back bar at the Maris Club Rooms in Auckland, what went on there?
It was a gathering of great rugby minds, often on a Saturday night after a tough weekend of rugby. It was fascinating back to the times that Kiki refers to, very good rugby player, by the way. You had a Maris senior team that was the Brook brothers, Zinzan, Marty, Robin. You had JK, Bernie McCahill, Terry Wright. You had a whole swag of All Blacks playing club rugby all the time. And the back bar was an opportunity to kind of mix and mingle with a lot of those guys. There was obviously a lot of club stalwarts that would be there. It was a kind of a meeting of all things Maris. We're a Maris club.
Did they play much club rugby?
They played a fair chunk of it back then.
So they would play Auckland.
But the club season, Auckland would come in after the club season.
Oh, of course.
So this is in the 90s.
Yeah. So sort of April to...
and then they'd play, some club rugby. There might have been some Super 10s or something like that happening at some point, but there was certainly not Super Rugby, which was dominating the landscape.
South Pacific Championship.
Yeah.
95, 96.
But if it's Terry Wright, it's before that, isn't it?
Yes, this would have been in the 90s.
Late 80s.
Yeah.
That's
a heck of a thing.
Championships. That's 7 sides, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a guy on Facebook who's been putting these old NPC videos on, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Old 80s and 90s stuff.
Well, at Bloodbath, they played with Harbour against Auckland for,
Battle of the Bridge.
Where there was some indiscretions that took place on both sides, and players ended up now they'll be banned for a season, right? Some of that activity, but it was a different time.
An old Dubai resident who's just gone back to Auckland, Rob Brindley. He was part of that campaign.
Yeah, right.
That's quite a story. Shout out to Rob, by the way.
Good one,
Auckland won.
That's good.
Auckland won, and but I remember that who was the fullback for Harbour dropped it on the line, and a try was scored. But then I also remember Eric Rush taking off somebody's head.
Yeah.
That was
Mark Carter maybe.
Yeah, might have been somebody got their head knocked off. It was a great, because Auckland, there was obviously no love lost between those two.
Well, I guess club rugby back then, in a lot of ways, the back bar at Maris was synonymous with clubs throughout the country, right? And you had fantastic, really senior players playing club rugby on a Saturday.
Yep.
Look at the Ponsonby Club and how successful that club has been, and it pains me to say. We had and the team that they've had playing, and the calibre of players they had, and the Gala Shields they won kind of end on end. And
Apollo was talking about.
Yeah, we had Apollo on a few weeks ago, and it was just player after player after player.
Yeah, I mean, between those two teams, and you throw a couple in from some other clubs, that was the guts of the All Blacks, in a lot of ways. Auckland was so dominant for so long, and they used to talk about Auckland being strong, the All Blacks being strong, and that's but the Blues are starting to find their way back, in a lot of ways, which is exciting. There's some great talent in that team, and the challenge in Auckland's always been in that Super Rugby model, retaining enough of your talent in market. And actually, you look at the black and red on the wall. Canterbury have done an extraordinary job of taking players from out of their region and really bringing them into that. Here's your role. We're going to have some guys that've got some flair out wide. We're going to have maybe a number 8 that's got a bit of flair, but the guts of the team's going to be able to be really efficient at their core business and
such a good youth group coming through. So when they do actually hit the 15, you don't realise that they're just part of the slot in.
And they've got they've got capability to feel. Get out there and just play your game, because the guy next to you is going to play his, and
absolutely,
you'll be okay once you get the ball.
So it all starts this week.
It does. It does. I'm hopeful that we can go one better this year and knock over those guys down south, but they'll be tough again.
They're always tough down south.
They're always tough.
Always tough down south.
Always tough.
Yeah. Great.
Thanks a lot. Best of luck with the future.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on board. It's been fascinating listening to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Guy.
Pleasure. And cheers, Guy. All the best.
Yeah.